All right, let's talk about a confrontation, a single moment on a dusty frontier that would literally change the course of world history. We're going to dive back almost 1,400 years to see what happened when a brand new, explosive force ran headfirst into one of the planet's oldest and most powerful empires and set off a collapse that nobody thought was even possible. Okay, so picture this. The year is 633 AD. We're right on the border between two totally different worlds. On one side, you've got the vast, unforgiving Arabian desert, and on the other, the rich, established lands of the mighty Sasanian Persian Empire. Now, for centuries, this border was pretty predictable. Some trade, a few minor scuffles. But right now, there's something new in the air, a wind blowing across the sand, and a very, very old empire is about to be challenged like never before. And out of that desert emerges a small raiding party. These guys are on lean, tough horses and camels, carrying pretty simple weapons, but don't let their appearance fool you for a second. They are absolute masters of this terrain. And they're moving with a speed and a unified sense of purpose that is totally new and, frankly, deeply unsettling to the empire watching from its fortresses. And facing them, the walking symbols of imperial power. The Sasanian cataphracts. Seriously, just think of them as ancient tanks. Riders and horses, both just covered head to toe in heavy armor. For 400 years, these guys have been the unshakable guardians of this frontier. In their eyes, they're just dealing with another group of bandits. They have no idea they're staring history right in the face. I mean, it seems like a complete and utter mismatch, right? A total joke. But to really understand why this small clash is so incredibly important, we need to pull the camera back from this dusty border and take a look at the state of these two powers. Because this wasn't just some random skirmish. No, this was a collision of two vastly different worlds. One was ancient and, honestly, exhausted. The other was brand new and absolutely buzzing with energy. And when you look at them side by side, the contrast is just stark. On one side, the Sasanian Empire, it's been around for over 400 years, it's huge, it's prestigious, but it is tired. And on the other side, the Rashidal Caliphate, it's barely even a year old, but it's unified, it's energetic, and it is expanding with incredible speed. So let's talk about that Persian Empire. It really was a giant, but it was a giant with feet of clay. See, it had just survived this absolutely catastrophic, decades-long war with its arch-rival, the Byzantine Empire. And I mean, this was one of the most destructive wars in ancient history. It left Persia completely bankrupt, politically unstable, and its military was just drained. Meanwhile, down in the Arabian Peninsula, something truly revolutionary had just happened. The tribes there, who for centuries were fragmented and always fighting each other, were now unified for the very first time. And what unified them was the new faith of Islam. This unity created a state just brimming with this fervent energy, a shared purpose, and a powerful desire to expand its influence. So, how does this new power even start to challenge the giant next door? Well, not with a big conventional invasion. Nope, they used a strategy of 1,000 cuts, something far, far more difficult for a big old empire to handle. You see, these first encounters weren't about a full-scale war. They were based on the traditional Arabian idea of the ghazwa, or the raid. The goal wasn't to conquer and hold cities, it was to hit fast, gather intelligence, and probe for weaknesses. And this tactic was just devastatingly effective. Small, mobile forces would just surge across the border. They'd strike a weak point, like a small town or a supply caravan, seize whatever they could, and then, poof. They would vanish back into the desert, long before the slow, heavy Sasanian army could even figure out what was going on. So what was the real impact of all these little pinprick attacks on this Persian behemoth? Well, it was less about the military damage and way more about the psychological shock. I mean, on paper, this should have been impossible. The Sasanian Empire commanded a massive professional army of over 100,000 soldiers. This was one of the largest and most sophisticated fighting forces on the entire planet at the time. So this is the question that must have absolutely haunted the Sasanian generals. Why couldn't their massive war machine stop these small, seemingly insignificant raids? The answer had nothing to do with numbers, and for them, that was the terrifying part. The answer wasn't about numbers or tech. It was all about asymmetry.
The Arab forces were just so much more mobile. Their motivation was through the roof, a powerful mix of religious conviction and the very real promise of wealth. And most importantly, they used the desert itself as a weapon. It was this vast ocean of sand where they could retreat and regroup, and where the heavy Persian army simply could not follow. This quote, even though it's attributed, it just perfectly captures the feeling of frustration and helplessness that must have been rippling through the Sasanian command. They were fighting an enemy that just refused to stand and fight on their terms, like trying to fight a phantom that hits you and then just disappears. So these small initial raids, they had an effect that was so much bigger than the value of any loot they took. They started a chain reaction that, once it got going, just could not be stopped. This was a psychological earthquake. The belief that the empire was invincible, which was the very foundation of its authority, it began to crack. For the first time in centuries, the border wasn't secure. The empire suddenly looked weak, not just to its enemies, but to its own people too. And that, right there, is why those first skirmishes mattered so much. With every single successful raid, Arab morale and confidence just soared. They were realizing the giant was vulnerable. These small tests of strength proved that the frontier could be broken, and that paved the way for the full-scale invasions that would follow soon after. The very first domino had just been pushed. And it just leaves us with this final, powerful thought. It really shows how history can turn on the smallest of hinges, and how a new idea, when it's combined with a new way of fighting, can challenge and ultimately bring down even the mightiest empires on Earth.